And confirm that we're all here for the first playtest of Matthew Colville's new Amber Diceless RPG Paste RPG.
Yeah, that would be people. That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. This is the first in what I hope will be a new series in which I interview other YouTubers, doesn't have anything to do with D&D, about what it's like being on YouTube and, whatever their specialist subject is. Because it's sort of my underlying hypothesis that YouTube is this island that many of us wash up on the shores of after some other hugely dysfunctional industry that we did our time in. For example, I don't know this guy, but for example, Rick Beato was an accomplished producer in music, and then the music industry changes and becomes really junky. And so he goes to YouTube, and now he's sort of the godfather of music YouTube, that kind of thing. My first guest is Dr. Jackson Crawford. He is an expert in Old Norse language and myth. Do not listen to what I say in the introduction. In fact, this isn't the introduction. This is the introduction to the introduction, because I screwed it up and I said that he's an expert in Norse language and myth. But Old Norse is an actual language, like Old English is a language, and he's basically an expert on the folks that we call the Vikings. And so we talk a lot about that, but we also talk a lot about just what is it like being on YouTube. If you've never seen any of Dr. Crawford's videos and you're interested in them, I will link in the doobly-doo to my favorite of his videos. It is the story of Thorstein Staffstruck, and it's about the notion of the drengskaper, the sense of the Old Norse sense of the virtues of manliness. And it's just a really good story that he tells in a very engaging manner. We talk a little bit about some new developments in his field that happened in January, and then he mentions something big coming in March. I think we now know that something big was the discovery of the oldest attestation of the name Odin that pushes back our understanding of how old that word for that person is by quite a ways. I hope you folks like this video. I would love to do more of them. Let me know what you think in the comments below. On with the show. We are joined today by Dr. Jackson Crawford. Dr. Crawford is YouTube's preeminent Norse expert, an expert on Norse language and myth. He's a PhD graduate of the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He first got interested in Norse language through the entirely typical and ordinary process of really liking dinosaurs and wanting to take Latin because that's the language that dinosaur names are in. And through that process arrived at Old Norse, which was interesting to him because the stories were better in Old Norse compared to a bunch of other ancient languages. And I thought it would be an interesting exercise to talk to Dr. Crawford. We've been YouTube neighbors now for years, and ask him about what it's like being a YouTuber and how, if at all, YouTube has changed his life. But before we get to that, much more important, this was a question I asked yesterday when we did a little preliminary chat just to test our technology. But the YouTube audience deserves to see the answer to this. What is your favorite Western?
Oh, I was supposed to remember what I said.
No. You can give me a completely new answer.
I think I could give you a top three, which,
Yeah.
You accurately deduced the Searchers. I love the Searchers, even though I kind of feel like in every movie that John Wayne is in, he kind of plays the same character, but I feel like he does it best in the Searchers.
Yeah.
Right. And the Searchers is also a movie kind of like Moby Dick, where every single frame is worth the last frame.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Searchers is way up there. Magnificent Seven, 1960 has got to be in my top three. And I'll take For a Few Dollars More, edging out the other parts of the Dollars trilogy. So I'll give you a top three. I don't think I could pick among them, though.
That's fair. So how long have you been a YouTuber? Do you remember when did you upload your first YouTube video?
Oh, the very first YouTube videos I uploaded were in 2012, and those are long, long gone. I was sitting in my office at UCLA, and I made a few back then, including at the request of a good friend of mine who is now Father Jude of the Dominican Order, an Old Norse version of Hey Jude.
Ha!
So that used to exist. Maybe it's less in a private setting. But the first iterations of my current channel are from late 2016. So actually not that much later than you started your current channel, right?
Yeah, it was sometime in 2015, I think, is when I started. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so kind of concurrent.
Yeah, I think we're, yeah, as far as YouTube goes, I think it's accurate to say that we are contemporaries. You wrote your PhD thesis on color theory. Well, I don't know if it's theory, but color in Old Norse. Is that correct? Do I remember that rightly?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have a somewhat heterodox opinion regarding the word for blue and what
Yes.
and how it is normally translated versus how you translate it. What is the controversy there?
Well, I appreciate you hitting this topic. This is probably the thing that I could bloviate about the most of anything. But so there's a long-standing notion. It's become kind of a commonplace, the way that counterintuitive things sometimes become, that Old Norse has no word for blue. The modern Scandinavian languages do have a word for blue, and it comes from the Old Norse word blor or blaur, to use Icelandic pronunciation, which the reason people insist that it doesn't mean blue in Old Norse is that it's used for ravens.
Right.
But if you observe birds closely, ravens and crows and the black feathers of magpies, other corvids like that, have a blue sheen to them.
Right.
So the fact that in poetry ravens are described as blue, to me, is just good observation.
Yeah.
But it's led to this whole insistence for decades and decades and decades. Most people translate both the word svartur, which means black, and blår, which I insist means blue, as black. And it kind of drives me crazy. So I did my doctoral dissertation actually trying to look at what, basically, I wanted to say, what do the color terms of Old Norse mean? Because different languages categorize colors different ways. Right. So, if
Sure.
you just look at the bill of this hat,
Yeah.
what color is that, using the simplest word you could use?
Well, I think it's blue. Yeah. I can't tell
Okay.
if it's blue or black here, but that, I think it's blue. Yeah. I would say if I had to pick one color, blue. Same color as your
Okay.
shirt. Yeah. Blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is it exactly the same? Can you tell the difference?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. One's
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
like navy blue or dark blue, and the other one's like a
Yeah.
denim blue. Sure. Yeah.
But knife to your throat, one word, they're both
Yeah.
blue, right?
It's blue. Absolutely.
Okay. So different languages make arbitrary calls about where these splits are. So
Right.
in some languages, this is actually there's one single word, a different word for this than for this. There's a line that English doesn't have, if you see
Right.
what I mean. So what I was looking for is, where are those lines in Old Norse? And based on the way that blår word was used, I guess my biggest hot take was that actually it does mean blue, because it's used for blue eyes, it's used for water, it's used for all kinds of things that we do describe as the sky, all kinds of things we do describe as blue. Probably the weird counterintuitive thing that I discovered is that there's not really a word for yellow,
Oh, interesting.
and yellow is included in red. So anyway, yeah, so that's, it's a PhD dissertation in Scandinavian studies. It's not exactly the next Stephen King thriller. But I've convinced, some people here and there, but including some translators, but the majority translation is people still ignore it and just translate both words as black.
Are there other controversies in your field that you're involved in?
On a scholarly level, sure, maybe a little bit. Probably my other big hot take, if you will, is that I don't think that the runic alphabet comes directly from the Roman alphabet.
Ah, right. Yeah, I watched your video on that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense in a place and time, right? We, as of January, the first runic inscriptions we know of come from about AD 25, at least the first century AD. So, I mean, there's definitely a time and a place where you can imagine Roman influence on Germanic-speaking peoples, but there's a lot of meta details of the alphabet and some letter shapes that I think are just impossible to explain by reference to the Roman alphabet, but that you can explain if the runes are derived from a local script. I currently think a local Celtic script in the Alps.
Right.
And I think you can make a good time and place argument for that. So, yeah, I guess that's my other big engagement in scholarly controversy, although I haven't published on this. I basically just talked about it on YouTube because, I'm not tenure track, so what's the point of publishing a paper about it that 8 people will see? I'll make a video about it that a few hundred people will watch maybe, and maybe one of them will actually put the nail in this coffin one day.
Well, speaking of not tenure tracked, you did your time in the academia trenches, and
did my time is a good word for it.
right. And you found it. It seems like, based on your reporting in your videos, it seemed like you found it incredibly frustrating. In fact, you even said at one point, I'm not your typical university professor. What is a typical university professor, and why were you a bad fit for that culture?
I don't know that I'm a terrible fit. I might not be typical in some ways, but I love the classroom. I really enjoy having someone to talk to personally. I was just thinking about this. You mentioned this video. That's part of my current Rune series.
Right.
Because it's been so windy around here lately, I wound up doing one installment of that at my buddy's dinosaur museum. Speaking of dinosaurs,
right?
And we just wound up having a conversation, and I just I miss teaching that way and actually having people to talk to. I reach more people through an iPhone, but it's not quite the same.
Right. No. Yeah.
So as a classroom instructor, I think actually I was pretty good, and my student evaluations I think reflect that. By default I would have stayed, and if I had thought that there was some tenure track path realistically open to me,
right.
That's absolutely what I would have done. But necessity is the mother of invention. Those jobs just aren't there.
Sure.
And all the jobs I had were, I had better and worse, but they were all temporary and always kind of contingent on, the worst situation was at UCLA. It was contingent on, I was basically doing someone else's job. So it was contingent on him not doing his job.
Sure. As soon as that dude came back from vacation, it was like, all right, well.
Yeah, actually, the way it ended up was it was more like as soon as he came back from vacation and went on another vacation.
Oh, I see.
But, yeah, so I mean, it's a very, it's a shaky life. You're never very secure.
Yep.
Year to year, you don't know where you're going to live. I was very affected because I don't have family or outside of the people I've met along the way, old friends who understand academic lifestyle very well. And I always kind of felt like, I don't know, I was kind of living up to all the bad prophecies they made. You're never going to make a living with that. And, kind of living hand to mouth and kind of embarrassed to talk about how work was going and all that stuff. So, yeah, it was socially sometimes difficult. It was economically very difficult. And, it contributed to a lot of jitters. And one thing I'm pretty open about is I struggled badly with alcoholism in those years.
You made a video about it. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people do. There's no blame for addiction. Addiction just it's an illness that affects people. But I think that certainly it was somewhat worsened by the precariousness of my position, just not knowing, where I was going to be next month or next year or whatever.
Do you remember
this is maybe too real here? But.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. Was there some inciting incident that made you think, oh, I should do this on YouTube?
Yes, absolutely. So, let's see. In the school year 2014 to 15, I didn't have an academic job because my UCLA job ended so suddenly that I couldn't get one.
Right.
So I went back to Wyoming and I worked at a little museum. And then in 2015, I got hired at Berkeley. So I moved to Berkeley and, I'm settling into my apartment there and I'm checking out my paycheck from the university and I'm still battling in the throes of alcoholism. This is all kind of connected, right? And I thought to myself, like, wow, I cannot pay my rent, eat, and drink on this salary. Right. I kind of have to pick one of the three.
Wow.
So this contributed both to the events, separate branch of the story, me getting sober, but also to me looking for another job. And so for a very, very brief while, I was hired at the National Maritime, the Maritime National Monument or something like that in San Francisco. I was one of the reenactors on a 19th century whaling ship.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a bad fit. First mate Crawford was, quickly to mutiny. And I found myself reflecting, while driving back over the bridge at 2 a.m. one night or something. I teach the stuff that is the most popular thing in the world. Why can I not make a living off of it?
Huh.
And wound up, I had been given and kind of ignored for a while this book about getting your expertise out there. And I'd actually already published my first book, my translation of the Poetic Edda at this point. But I read this book thinking maybe I'll get some insight here. And I thought, well, some of these new social tools on the internet might be the way to do it, kind of bypass the structure of the university, still sort of honor. And I say that while also saying I honor the tradition of academic integrity. That's not what this is about, but about just, I don't have to just talk to a classroom. I can just talk to anyone who wants to listen to me. And I decided to do YouTube because something in this book said that people trusted people they could see and hear more than people they could just hear. And I also thought, well, this way, and it took me a while to figure out how to do this stuff. In fact, you remember you were the person who got me to learn how to cut the video so that it didn't start with me pressing.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. I'm like, yeah, we got to get this guy a remote control.
that was, well, it was you because originally I just recorded it on my phone and just uploaded it raw. I didn't do anything. So it started like this and it ended like this, right? But you got me to, and then, that started me down the path where I started adding text and pictures and things like that, which I do think helps with my videos. And then eventually I went back to Wyoming for Christmas. I guess that first year I was doing this in 2016, and I made some videos along the way on the, because I'd always follow Highway 50 through Nevada, which is really pretty remote country. And then some in Wyoming, and then some in Alaska with my parents. And those videos with, the cool mountain backgrounds were much more popular. So I thought, oh, well, this is what I should be doing. Basically, combining these lectures with sharing with people the places I love.
Right. The American West. Yeah. The backgrounds of your videos. I mean, I remember in one of your videos, you talked about people thinking it's a blue screen. And it's like, that's ridiculous. Like why, if you had that background and you live there, it is where you live. Yeah. Why would you use a blue screen? Just put the camera up and see these amazing visuals behind you.
I thought it was funny because when I was at CU, I would sometimes get remarks like, why do you hike in a suit? And it was just because that's on my way to work.
Yeah, it's my job. Like, I have a job.
Yeah, I was driving to CU Boulder, and I passed this viewpoint, and I thought, I'll make a video here. Nobody else is here.
It's interesting
I still.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm still kind of shy about that. I actually tend to film only when there's nobody else around. I feel really self-conscious if somebody walks up on me, so I tend to be way away from the room. Yeah,
near where the coyotes and mountain lions are.
Yeah, I've still never seen a mountain lion, unfortunately. But
it's interesting to me that your decision, your process of becoming a YouTuber was, in a sense, very academic, right? You started with a book of advice, and you planned out and thought about it, and so there wasn't like you weren't already on YouTube. There wasn't some YouTuber that inspired you. You just had this desire to get the word out about your subject, and you saw this as an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and also it was a little bit conditioned by the fact that my desire to get out there in the public eye, to the extent that I have, was partially conditioned by just seeing that if you Google this stuff, a lot of the results you get are terrible, right? At best, they reflect a bad understanding of the information. At worst, they can be heavily ideologically skewed or skewered.
Yeah. There's a lot of ideological nonsense surrounding your topic that doesn't have anything to do with actual linguistics or culture or history.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought, it's sad because actually a lot of people in my field don't want to talk to the public. They don't want to publish for the public.
Why is that?
Because they feel like that reflects the public. Right. They think that, the people out there who are interested in this, they're Nazis. Like, well, you're not a Nazi.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And in fact, most of the people that I ever talked to about this, and I mentioned, I've had some trouble with some of these groups. Why? Right. Most people don't make that connection. It's actually not like common knowledge.
Sure. Yeah.
Of interest to those groups.
Yeah.
So I just feel like we're doing a huge disservice because if the people who know what they're talking about don't talk to the public, people are talking to the public.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it's typically not people that we would wish to. And so, I'm going to go a little afield onto some of the aims of my YouTube channel here, and
Sure.
maybe you can sympathize with some of this a little bit. Part of what I wanted to do was be neutral and idiosyncratic. I feel like you could here's see, I haven't developed this very well, and I'm still kind of sick, so maybe this will be super incoherent. But neither one of us is maybe the perfect encapsulation of what someone would generate in an AI machine for have a guy talk to me about D&D or have a guy talk to me
Sure.
about Norse myth,
Right. Yeah.
right? There's grit in the mouth a little bit for certain people. Like some people, will love my shtick or love your shtick, but for some people it will still grate on them a little bit
Sure.
because
Absolutely.
we're
Yeah.
very much ourselves.
Yeah.
Somebody might watch my Norse myth stuff and not like the cowboy lifestyle stuff, or somebody might watch your channel and love the D&D but hate the Euro trash electronica.
How dare you, sir? How dare you?
but
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. So like we're not generated in a lab
Right.
to be completely like smooth pills to swallow.
Yeah.
We are ourselves, and I think that that's important because I think that like if I was trying to be that perfect representation of what people want to hear
Right.
about this from, I'd probably be pretending to be pagan.
Right.
I'd probably have a beard 2 feet long and a bunch of tattoos, and I'd dye my hair blonde or something.
Right.
And pretend that I listen to heavy metal music, and it would eventually break down, and I wouldn't be able to keep it up.
Sure. Yeah. In your videos, you're not trying to sell yourself. You're trying to sell your topic. You're trying to sell your subject, and you're trying to sell your expertise. That's a huge part of your whole pitch. Is you want the people that arrive at your channel to first understand that you are an expert and this is your job, right? This is not a hobby for you. This is your background, your academic background.
But I also, and I think in the last few years I've gotten more sensitive to this. I also don't want people to think that I'm lording it over them. That I'm the guy with the PhD and I'm handing it down from the mountain.
Right.
You can disagree with me.
Yeah.
Part of what I try to do is as much as possible present raw data. If I'm talking about my interpretations, like this is why I think that the runes can't be from the Roman alphabet or something like that, I'm telling you why I think that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, get the hell out of this channel if you think,
Well, I mean, you also do a pretty good job of explaining where you fall in the spectrum of experts on this. And you do a really good job of representing other people in your field's point of view, which I think that is yet another thing that lends you credibility, because people, even if they don't think about it, they're going to be impressed by the fact that you're not trying to teach some orthodoxy. You're trying to teach your point of view of an academic subject.
Well, orthodoxies change.
Sure.
I mean, if I don't know how long YouTube or any of these videos will possibly last, but they could last long enough that the orthodoxy changes and then the stuff is outdated. In a way, I'm fortunate because what I'm talking about is in the past.
Yeah.
So our picture of it doesn't change that rapidly, typically.
No. It's rare that something like January happens where suddenly there's major news in the field, right?
Yeah. It just doesn't happen that often. And it doesn't make a book written, in some cases, even 100 years ago, worthless, because a lot of the data that's being built on is still the same.
Sure.
As long as people aren't twisting it around too much.
Yeah. They're all going to the same sources, right? And those sources, by definition, don't change. Are you conscious of the fact that whatever else is true, I mean, depending on how our civilization evolves, that this is your legacy? People are going to be watching your videos 500 years from now.
Well, I don't think that's very likely.
You don't
think
so?
It's very likely people could. No, I mean, honestly, I don't think it's very likely people will be watching my videos in 10 years.
Really?
Right? I mean,
I disagree.
No, I mean, well, who knows, right? I mean, 10 years ago, I couldn't have anticipated that I was even doing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
But I still think it's so hard to anticipate the future. I still am kind of waiting for this other shoe to drop.
I get it. Me too. Yeah, I know what you mean.
And yeah. Something is going to happen. Somebody's going to come along and just, commandeer this whole audience.
Yeah.
Or
I've thought
for
about
whatever
that.
reason.
About what happens when the culture just decides that talking heads is boring. Because they've had enough of that. And that becomes and we don't think of it now because we're soaking in it. But 10, 15, 50, 100 years from now, people might look back at this era of video creation as being just a fad, and that something else could come along.
Yeah, it could absolutely be. I mean, for instance, what if AI gets so good that anybody at home can just, input some scenario and basically make a animated movie
Sure.
or something like that? I mean, that's not an impossible scenario for 10, 20 years down the line. But I don't know. I just think that I'm a little bit hesitant to think that this will last that long. But as skeptical as I am of the lasting power of my own particular project, I think that I am on, not to over glorify my own position of things, but kind of on a forefront
Yeah.
of a change in academia from that more classroom based learning to people actually reaching out beyond the classrooms and saying, hey, you can learn this stuff, which you're not going to get a job doing anyway, without paying $40,000 a year.
Right.
Maybe you can pay off your car instead of taking these classes, but you can, you know, get the same information. I always thought it was an atrocity how much college cost.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that this is something that eventually has to change one way or the other, and that this is part of how it will change. Is people in fields like mine, which increasingly that funding gets cut, just kind of going straight to the popular audience. And one thing I've seen that I continually tell people in adjacent fields is no matter how fine grained the subject I get, no matter how obscure the language that we may be talking about, tens of thousands of people will watch it.
Right.
There's a huge curiosity about this stuff out there.
You talked about how before you started your channel, if you went online, you were aware that when people went online and looked up the subject, they would find all these crazy websites that had very, from your point of view, very bizarre points of view that had nothing to do with the real subject. Do you feel like that has changed? Do you feel like you've moved the needle there at all?
I don't know. And of course, I wouldn't be able to tell as well as someone on the outside because
Right.
My Google results are a little bit skewed toward me now.
Yeah.
But I think still, honestly, any given Wikipedia editor might have more influence on moving that needle than I do.
Ah, okay.
Because I think that's still the first place people look is
Right.
something like Wikipedia.
How would you rate Wikipedia as a source of information on this?
Article by article, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's really atrocious. Sometimes I've been shocked at just how, like this misquotings and things like that.
Have you ever been compelled to edit? I mean, anybody can edit.
No, I have many, many flaws, and one of them is pride. I cannot do stuff anonymously. It's like I have to do stuff under my own name. Like I don't know why. It's a horrible compunction, and it has served me poorly in the past. But I just can't do it anonymously.
That's interesting. So yeah, so you read this stuff and you disagree with it, but you're like, it's not. I can't. I'm not gonna bother jumping into that ocean. How would you characterize the difference between like the students that you had in classrooms and what you see in your comments section, or the kind of the regular viewers that you have?
Well, students are often there because they have to be,
right?
And that's not the worst thing. Give me especially a smallish classroom, 30 students or less. I can get that class interested, right? I can make them look forward to that class, even if they come in not caring about it. They're just there for history credit or literature credit. It's a little bit different with a big class. I was, unfortunately, I guess I kind of had a little bit of a curse of success where, especially by the time I was at the University of Colorado, I was enough of a kind of known name lecturing that I was just given these like 200 person auditoriums. And it's not the same social dynamic there.
Right.
People can get it is much harder to fight the sort of inherent boredom and the weird social reinforcement of that boredom that comes with people not wanting to stand out in a crowd that big.
Right.
So I think with students, they're not necessarily coming at it interested. Talking to people online, it's quite different because, of course, pretty much if someone is listening to me, that person is already interested in this stuff.
Right.
Right. I mean, you weren't watching a Rush documentary and YouTube recommended, Jackson Crawford's Free Course in Runes, right? That's just not a very likely.
No, you had to look for it. You're right. YouTube has to think that for some reason I or anybody is going to be interested in your videos.
Right. Or you have to have seen somebody else link it or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So people are already coming at it interested. and maybe already coming at it pretty informed, right? Depending. So I always have to kind of thread this needle that wasn't as much of a concern with a class, because with a class, for the most part, I know what they know,
Right.
right? I'm building
Sure.
for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sometimes people come to me with, fairly big scaffoldings built up already.
Right.
So I have to kind of anticipate what people might already know, what sounds boring to that audience, because of course, a lot of those people are the ones who are going to become my Patreon supporters, and they don't want to hear the exact same stuff over and over again. So yeah, it's interesting, just that balancing act that you weave between the very curious total neophyte and the very curious, let's say, Wikipedia editor level
Right.
person who's interested in it and has systematized it and knows it pretty well. And I mean, when I do interviews on my channel with experts about rune finds or other languages or stuff like that, I mean, the questions that my Patreon supporters give them are often worthy of an academic conference.
That's cool. That's cool. That means that you're finding the right people. Like the right people are coming to your
Absolutely.
channel. People that not only are interested, but also have a little bit of a background and a little bit of expertise on this. Do you ever find yourself making a video deliberately because you've seen the direction that the comments have gone from another video?
Yeah, or someone has asked me a question or something is widely misunderstood in another video, or yeah, absolutely. Somehow I still haven't run out of topics.
Are you worried that you will?
I don't know. I could see it happening.
Right.
I mean, a time or two I have felt maybe not like I was going to run out of topics, but like I didn't have time to get ready
Right.
enough topics. Mostly what I do is I try to be very responsive to what people are asking me.
Fair enough.
Right. Just about any video starts as a question someone asked, or a comment someone made, or a accusation someone leveled. Right. It's all kind of rooted in the audience.
What is your relationship with because your interest in Old Norse is pretty straightforwardly intellectual, academic. It is a subject that you came by honestly. It's not like part of your heritage or your background or anything like that. What is your relationship with the folks who show up in your videos because they've got some crazy agenda that they might not even realize has nothing to do with the actual people that lived in that place in that time?
Well, for fear of alienating someone who might misunderstand, there's a distinction here. You can be interested in this stuff because it's your heritage.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's nothing illegitimate about that.
Right.
But there are definitely people who see it as illegitimate that you take an interest or teach something that isn't your heritage.
That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. So I do deal with that. I don't personally moderate, or 98% of the time even see YouTube comments. Right. Okay. I have an assistant who handles that stuff.
That's wise. That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah. Part of that is also, that sin of pride. At a certain point, I mean, look, my audience is positive for the most part. I've always been amazed that, I have to step back sometimes and remind myself that when I'm upset that a video has a 99% like-dislike ratio, that it's amazing that it's a bad ratio.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. Because you learn the metrics, right? And if you told someone else, oh, this video has a 99.3% like, they're like, oh, that's amazing. You go, well, that's actually pretty bad. Right. Because the range is actually really narrow.
Right. It's actually one of the lowest on my channel in that case. Yeah. But the thing is, I'm one of those people, and I think most people are like this. I'm going to remember that 1%.
Oh,
if
sure.
I see it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to remember the nasty stuff. So I think that part of kind of keeping this project going is being a little bit more separate from that.
Right.
And it's also a fire hose now. I mean, there's so much email and so many comments and all of those things. I just can't manage it. So I have an assistant. I've actually paid a portion of my Patreon earnings for the past few years to watch that stuff for me. And it's a makes a big difference for me. I mean, I might have burnt out a lot earlier.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Still have to deal with that stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Because people comment about everything. They comment about your appearance. They comment about whatever, and it can be really, it can be really.
Oh,
like,
it can be. It could be the
wearing.
dumbest things. Yeah. Well, and of course, then I get super sick of the same corrections,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
right? Um, especially about things like pronunciation
Yeah.
or runes, things like that.
How closely do you
Um,
pay attention to your metrics? Like, do you watch how your videos do, and do you think about why some videos do better than others, and try to do you make videos based on what it seems like YouTube says is succeeding?
yeah, I mean, you see the same channel dashboard that I do.
Yeah.
It's a little bit calculated to make you feel bad about videos that don't do as well as, PewDiePie's latest upload or something. Your audience doesn't seem to like this as much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Why did you do this?
Like,
You should feel bad.
yeah, thanks, YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, well, yeah, I mean, so I do watch it, and it helps me decide what to continue making, especially if I'm testing the waters of a series.
Right.
And it doesn't seem like people are very interested in the first parts of the series. Then the later parts of the series are going
Yeah.
to come late, if ever. But I am terrible, utterly atrocious at predicting what videos people want to see. I will work for hours and days editing some video that I think is going to be, my magnum opus,
Right.
and then nobody watches it. Or this literally happened in August. I'll say, oh man, what's a 5-minute video that I can upload while I'm, sitting in this train, going from town to town in Norway because I've got to get a video up in a couple hours. Thinking, well, it's so short and such an obscure topic, no one's going to see it, and then it becomes the 10th biggest video on my channel.
Are you speaking of a specific video? Do you have a specific video in mind?
Yeah.
What is that video?
It's a cool video and it's a cool little talk. I just didn't expect it to blow up like it did, right? I didn't see what made it blow up and others not, but it was about the oldest book in Norway.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a cool little topic.
Yeah.
Great guest speaker who explains it very well. But again, I don't see why that one and not
Why was it that one? Yeah.
20 other videos that are
Yeah.
just like that. But who knows? I
Do
can't
you
predict this stuff.
Do you see YouTube as something that you are learning and getting better at, or trying to get better at?
Yeah. Do you
Oh yeah.
think about that? I mean,
I get it all the time.
I figured.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how you could keep doing this if you didn't have that attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I experiment quite a bit. I've experimented with everything from thumbnails to titles and title length and video length. And I just don't know that I know beforehand what works.
Right.
Right. Some of my longest, people say don't upload videos that are too long. Some of my really long videos are really popular, and some of my really short videos are really not. So,
I don't think anybody really understands the algorithm. And I think that it's all received wisdom, and it's all a rush to consensus. And then it just becomes this thing everybody thinks they know.
yeah.
I don't think I've never really seen any, and I actually, I'm not sure there are. I think folks that make YouTube videos the way you and I do, which is to say, we're not chasing after the front page of YouTube. You upload the stuff you believe in, and some of it's idiosyncratic. You don't always know why it does well or why it does badly.
What would you do if you were trying to get on the front page of YouTube? Like if that was just next week, I'm going to be recommended to every single person on YouTube. What would you do?
You mean like what kind of video would I make to get to do that? Well, I mean, my specialist subject is Dungeons and Dragons, and it turns out that in the past 3 or 4 months, there's been quite a lot of drama in that field, and I have deliberately avoided talking about it because for a lot of reasons. I think it's largely a distraction, right? It gets into legal licenses and stuff like that most people don't know anything about in the first place. And so even a lot of their anger, which might, from my point of view, seem like, yeah, you should be angry about this. I know in reality, you didn't know anything about this. They didn't know anything about this 6 weeks ago. You're getting angry because everybody else is getting angry, and that's not healthy. So I would make a video about that. I would make a video. In fact, I was on the front page of YouTube about 6 weeks ago as a guest in a Legal Eagle video talking about this subject. And I don't think his videos normally go to the front page. So this is one of those things where it was a hot button topic. That's the and I think the half-life of those kinds of controversies are measured in, at best, days.
Yeah, I think those topics people get angry about, they're matches. They
Yeah.
burn real bright and then
Yep.
they go out.
And then they burn out. Yep.
I'm going to divert this just
Sure.
a degree. So you write scripts.
Yep.
You don't. When I watch you, I don't feel like I'm watching someone reading a script. You seem, organic.
That's the trick. Like we've had occasionally, we've had guests, and I run a company, and some of my employees, we fly them out to LA a couple times a year so we can all be in the same place and work together. We don't just make videos. I make videos. We make games. And so I'll fly them out, and sometimes one of my coworkers will say, "Hey, I want to make a video." I'm like, "Go for it," right? And I let them do their thing. But I will usually try to I'll sit there for the first 5 or 6 minutes while they're recording their video, and so I'm just literally off screen watching somebody else do what I do, and I'll try to give them a little bit of advice. Because I used to direct actors professionally. I used to work in video games, and I was a lead writer, and I would hire the actors and I would direct them in the booth. And I learned a lot. And something I learned is that if the person is not actually an actor, you sort of can't direct them. So I'll have people reading a script, and I realize I can't direct this person. So the best thing I can do is just kind of blow on the sails so the ship ends up going in the right harbor. And what I will usually say is don't make eye contact too long. Look away from the camera every once in a while, because normal people having a normal conversation, they don't do this for 5 minutes, just straight without looking away. We look around, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get them to be more informal and more casual, even though what they're doing is nothing could be further from the truth. They've got a script in front of them and a giant camera and a microphone, right? And yeah, so it's trying to get somebody to be, and one of the things one of the things I realized watching other people do what I do, literally read a script on a teleprompter into a camera, is that it's like 5 different muscles. And one of them is being able to write a script that is written the way I talk on YouTube.
Right.
And totally, I think you and I are relatively similar in this. I think like your normal conversational speech is pretty similar to the way you talk in a video.
Yeah, too quiet and and various other things. Yeah.
No, I think that like anybody watching your videos, no one is going to imagine that that's not you, that's an act. 0 people watching your videos, unless they're idiots. That's an act.
The real me.
No. Yeah. You can't fool anybody. You can't fool anybody. Regardless of what internet quizzes tell you. No, but that's the point, is that you seem authentic. And that's for what I do, writing a script that in text sounds the way I talk. That's one thing. Then I'm sitting there, and now I've got to read this script that I wrote, but I don't have it memorized. If I did, wouldn't need a teleprompter, which means I have to be able to read ahead in the script so that I know what emphasis to put on what syllable, right? So that it comes out right. I have to be reading ahead. So I've got lines of dialogue going past me, and I'm reading ahead, but I've got an audio tape in my head that is playing on a delay. So I'm constantly listening back to what I just said, and I can hear, I did that wrong. I'm directing myself. I can go, there is a better take of that. And we've seen people somewhat astonishingly, who I think because they listen to my videos, they don't watch them. So we have occasionally streamed me, recording a video on Twitch. Here's the behind the scenes. I'm just going to do it live on Twitch, and that'll turn into a YouTube video. And people are astonished to discover that there are takes. They think it's one unbroken video, and I'm like, you're crazy. You can see the edits in the video, but that's the trick. The trick is coming up with a way to do it so that it feels natural and smooth. And knowing in my head, I've got to go back. I flubbed this line. There's a better take here. I've got to go all the way back to here, because otherwise I'm going to give my editor a giant headache, because I know that you can't splice in a cut there. And that's what I mean. There's like several muscles that I have to have all flexing at the same time, and it's sort of a pain in the ass.
So you're not editing yourself?
No. I used to, and it's it's incredibly tedious. because I have really strong opinions about what makes, I have a really strong opinions about what makes a good video, about what makes good editing. And it created scenarios where I would record a video direct to camera. I started here in this room, and then I would be editing it, and I would be so upset at a take or my inability to splice two bits together that I'd be like, okay, I have to fire the thing up again and then record it and try to make sure my hair matched the way it was. And it was awful. And so once we had the Kickstarter and we had our own offices and we had our own products that generated revenue, I have somebody, my friend Jerry, who's our tech director, our IT director, and he does all the editing. And I'm like, awesome. I don't have to worry about it. And he makes different decisions than I would make in the edit, but that's great because that means I don't have to do it. But does that mean you edit? You have an assistant. Do you edit your own videos?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
The entire video production is me.
Right.
My assistant is communications. Yeah, I mean, part of it is that anyone editing my videos would not only need to know how to edit, but would need to know Old Norse. And that's right. I mean,
wow, I had not considered that. That is a good point.
Yeah, it's a tall order. So yeah, it's front to back me, but it's interesting because I was just thinking, you talk about your background with, actors and professional productions like video games. My background, lecturing in a classroom, my videos are basically one take.
Yeah, because it's a lecture, because that's a muscle you have. Yeah. You've developed that speak. I can do this a little, and people have seen it on Twitch, but for you, it's a full-time job. You have that muscle of being able to speak extemporaneously for long periods of time without saying and ah and repeating yourself and stuff like that. And that's a lecturer's talent.
Well, I mean, I cut things here and there, but I often even leave in places where I misspeak and then correct myself. I meant to say whatever. Because this is to me, I guess it's interesting because we're analogizing it to different experiences. Like you have more of a studio experience. I'm just thinking of it as a classroom where, whatever, I'm not going to cut out that 5 seconds because, it'll look weird or something. I do cut if I think that I said something, real like, oh, this would be misleading if I leave it in or something, or, I don't want people to see me sneeze or something like that. Yeah, but I've even left in me like almost falling off of mouth.
I remember that. I remember the ghost of John Wayne knocking your camera over.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, John Wayne knocked my camera over.
That was one of the funniest things I've seen. That made me laugh so hard. I could not wait to get to the comments. Before you even righted the camera and you made the same joke I was making in your comments. I'm like, the ghost of John Wayne knocked his camera over.
I felt so bad about that. My grandma once danced with John Wayne.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty. In what context?
Well, my grandfather was a miner in Moab, Utah.
Okay, so it was a shoot.
John Wayne.
Yeah.
John Wayne filmed a lot of movies around there.
Yeah, he did.
So they would just hang out. Yeah, my grandfather also got drunk on a plane with Clint Eastwood once.
Holy wow, that's epic. That's a hell of a story.
I mean, yeah, I'm jealous of that.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. We were talking yesterday, and we got cut off by the Zoom limit. But my grandfather's favorite movie was Rio Bravo, and it has become one of my favorite movies. And his daughter, my mother, wrote to Warner Brothers in the late '80s, talking about her dad was like 65 at this point or whatever, and it was his birthday, and this is his favorite movie. Do you guys have any props really that laying around that I meaning her, I could buy? And she sends this letter off, doesn't think anything about it, figures the answer is probably going to be no. And before her dad's birthday rolled around, she got this giant manila envelope in the mail from the Warner Brothers prop department, because there was no eBay, there was no internet or anything like that. And requests like my mom's were actually pretty rare. And somebody at the archive was like, oh, awesome. And, she talked up her dad. And so she got I saw it. It was amazing. I don't even know where this is now. One of his children probably has it, but she got those director chairs they have that have canvas backs. She got one that had Howard Hawks' name on the back. She got a call sheet. She had a call sheet with all the actors. So is it Angie Dickinson? Is John Wayne, Dean Martin are all signing in. Man. And she was like, oh man, she was hugely, and of course he was over the moon. He questioned whether it was real because it was so extraordinary. But it's one of those things where there's no way that would happen today. Right.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Man. that is a great movie. I have to say that's the second or third best John Wayne movie. I don't know. The Shootist is really good
Sure.
too.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, it's real good. Late John Wayne. Yeah.
Uh,
Where do you
but the
stand on like,
music is
what about The Quiet Man?
Quiet Man is good too. I wouldn't put it in the top three.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I
But the
think you mentioned,
music in Rio Bravo is wonderful.
oh, it's great. Oh yeah, the music in Rio Bravo is aces. It's so good that they remade that movie like 2 or 3 times. I think John Carpenter remade it. That's Assault on Precinct 13. It's just a remake of Rio Bravo. And then there's El Dorado. It is. And there's El Dorado, which is a remake, and I think it's a Howard Hawks remaking his own movie just because he liked that story and wanted to do it again. Do you get? I think you've mentioned this in one of your videos. Do you get recognized when you go out now that you're a famous YouTuber?
Now and then, not very often.
Is it weird when you do?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of fun because people don't necessarily initially know why they're recognizing you.
Oh,
You know?
sure. Yeah. Like, where do I know that person from? Yeah.
Yeah, that the only place where I was really frequently recognized and it was a big deal was in Iceland.
Oh, right. Okay. I think
Um,
that's, yeah. Yeah. You
yeah,
mentioned that,
every
and
day
that's what I remembered it. Right.
I was surprised. Yeah, every day I was in Reykjavik.
Well, correct me if I'm
I
wrong,
was
but there's only like 700 people in that country.
yeah,
Right. Like,
but it was really surprising. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily think that Icelanders will want to watch someone like me talking about it, all this Icelandic literature, but I was pretty frequently recognized there. You know, here, like the last time it happened to me here, I was going through a drive-through window, right? And I pull up and, I'm handing my card to the guy and he just stares at me for a moment and he says, uh, where do I know you from? And I said, I don't know. I'm
I don't know.
here, now and then.
I don't know.
And he
Yesterday when
said,
I bought a
wait,
taco, I bought like, yeah.
right. And he said, well, wait, do you study Old Norse? I said, yeah. Oh my God, I've watched all your videos or something like that. Okay, well, that's fun.
What are the
But it was
interactions normally like? You seem like a pretty like personal and private dude. Are you at all freaked out when people recognize you?
No, not that kind of spontaneous thing.
Oh, okay.
Been freaked out by some of the planned interceptions or meetings.
What is that?
Uh,
Whoa, that sounds like drama. What?
oh, I've had some incidents, but no, like I had a great one. I was in Moab. I'm actually back in Moab fairly frequently. It's my grandfather's old stomping grounds, and there's the old rock shop there, Lynn Ottinger's rock shop, and I was recognized by the guy working at the rock shop, and that was really cool from YouTube. So, sometimes it's really rewarding. Kind of makes you feel like it. And I like having that sense that I do reach people
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
because
Yeah.
in insulating myself from comments and all these things, sometimes it does feel weirdly like I'm talking into a void. Patreon helps with that a lot because, of course, Patreon, the community, we all talk quite a bit. But,
Right.
it's still neat to put a face on a name. And I've started doing meetups with Patreon now. So I started that when I
really?
went to Scandinavia because it
That's
was
cool.
something Ian McCallum does. Yeah,
That's cool. And how do they? I've thought about doing that. How do they go?
very well,
Wow.
very well. It's very fun. I mean, these people are taking the time and money to support you.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've had security concerns with some things, but not with something on Patreon. I've very seldom had someone pay money to bother me. So
I get that. Sure.
it's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not very often.
How would you? I mean, this is a very broad question, so feel free to answer this in whatever sense makes sense to you. How would you say YouTube has changed your life? What is the biggest impact YouTube has had on your life?
I mean, gosh, money.
Right.
I lived just hand to mouth as a untenured instructor for years and years and years, and as a grad student before that. Patreon just totally changed my life. Allowed me to make a much better living, and that took a long time to get used to, right?
Right.
Because when you go kind of, maybe not 0 to 60, but you kind of go like 10 to 30 all of a sudden.
Right.
And you've never been up at 30. Like you don't really know what to do with money, and you don't really know what taxes are.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yep.
I had an adjustment period there, and I'm actually past my peak Patreon. My Patreon's been sliding for a while now. I don't know exactly what all is behind that, but I figure it's the economy mostly.
Sure.
but it's been it's just been incredible to live so much better, right? Just all around,
Yeah.
just because of that Patreon support, and eventually to be able to drop teaching. I mean, I actually don't like putting it that way.
Yeah. You're still a teacher.
Yeah, to drop the
Yeah.
classroom, um, and I mean that freed up so much more time to make better videos, to work on my books. Um, this is YouTube is absolutely a full-time job as it is, and
Right.
once that was making me more than the university, it was a pretty natural decision to change over. Um, it's made me sometimes, depending on my mood, sometimes maybe feel like a little bit less of a failure because,
You're
like,
pretty, it seems like, yeah, you often, there's this subtext or sometimes just text where you seem surprised that anybody would be interested in this subject when you're talking about it. But yet at the same time, often another subtext in your videos is how resonant you find these stories and these people for somebody who lives in the American West, and where you have this other, it's a frontier tradition, heavily self-reliant. So it's interesting that there's this tension, because it seems like you're always surprised that anybody cares about this.
well, sometimes I'm kind of joking.
Oh, fair enough.
But yeah, I think that it's I don't want to oversell that kind of frontier connection, because that's not that much of what I think it makes those stories so great. It's part of it, but it's also just the very open-ended sense of mystery that I think are in these stories, partially maybe intentionally, partially just because they're not always preserved fully.
Right.
We talked about this once on Twitter. You watch the first Star Wars alone,
yeah,
or you read the first Riffs book alone.
Riffs, yeah,
right. And it's just, they paint these vast, dim horizons.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of the appeal is thinking, well, I've only seen 2 planets in this Star Wars movie. Like I can imagine billions of other planets. And, frankly, you probably have more of an imagination than George Lucas. And, what you fill in there is part of the appeal. It's funny because I think we deal with this mixed push and pull, where we want to know what the details are that are going to be filled in.
But it was the mystery that attracted us in the first place. Yeah.
We also kind of secretly want it to stay mysterious because we want to kind of keep speculating.
Yeah.
It's
funny you bring that up, because you are actually, I don't know how much you've talked about this on your channel. I know you have, but you did a thing where you was it Star Wars as told by the Old Norse? You have like your own translation or something, not literally translation, but it's like you turned Star Wars.
It is literally a translation.
But is it what is it? Was it a translation of the novel? Is it the script? What was that?
Oh, it's pretty much just the first 6 Star Wars movies in Old Norse, but I changed it so it's not in space, right? It's in the North Atlantic and the Viking Age and all of that. That was something I did in grad school. In a life where I finish my day and go to bed, pour all my regrets out of my boots. They're not it's not the biggest regret, but it's not a pride point or anything, it's nothing you could make anything of.
Does that still get any heat? Do you still get people who find that online and ask about it?
And occasionally people who think it's real.
Wow. Real?
Yeah. Well, there's this pseudo scholarly introduction to it.
Oh, right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. It's like a found document technique. I get it.
Yeah. So where it's actually not, so the claim of the pseudo scholarly introduction is not that this is what Star Wars is based on, but that Star Wars is based on the cognate German tradition. So this is like a sister tradition to what became Star Wars.
Awesome.
Right. But then there's all kinds of dumb jokes, like, and a lot of it is just basically dumb jokes for myself. Like when you go from the chapters that correspond to the prequels to the chapters that correspond to the original trilogy,
right?
The Old Norse gets about 30 years more archaic.
Wow. That is some,
right.
That is some like J.R.R. Tolkien shit. Like really thinking about how the language changes and evolves over time.
it's a little too much. And then there's some more pseudo scholarly stuff sprinkled through it, like how in our oldest best manuscripts, Hani the duelist shoots Greedo or throws his axe at Greedo
Oh my
first.
God.
But later manuscripts, as they come under the influence of the chivalric Arthurian tradition,
Yeah.
they want to present him as more of a
Yeah.
a noble figure above initiating the conflict, and so they very awkwardly wedge in Greedo.
That is so good. Dude, that is
there's a
so
lot of
good.
crap like that.
Oh, I love that amount of thought that you put into that. Is
That's me
that
13
is
years ago.
that is I have an enormous amount of respect for that. I have an enormous amount, because that really is, I know this is very nerdy of me to say, but that it really is the kind of thinking that Tolkien applied to stuff like, well,
sure.
wait a minute, like how is it that we know what these things were called? And he started to develop this idea of, I'm translating this into English from, yeah. And Tolkien, this is a question I've been wanting to ask you for a while, like, because I'm a kind of amateur Tolkien scholar, or maybe a Tolkien nerd is a better way of putting it. If I were just straight up a linguist, and I didn't really know anything or care anything about like Lord of the Rings or any of that nonsense, and I was studying Old Norse or one of those related languages, would I just naturally come across references to Tolkien?
Yeah, sometimes.
Really?
Especially about Beowulf.
Yeah.
His article, Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics, is actually a pretty foundational study.
Right, because he sort of invented the idea of treating it as an actual piece of literature as opposed to just a source of knowledge regarding how the language worked.
Right, and taking the monsters seriously. There's, if you read 19th and early 20th century works about Old English and Old Norse literature, they're weirdly apologetic anytime things like dragons come up. Aren't these ridiculous stories? But he doesn't take it that way. But he comes up in the acknowledgments of a lot of early 20th century books. So, for example, the book I learned Old Norse from, Evie Gordon's Introduction to Old Norse, J.R.R. Tolkien, pre-fame, it gets a big shout out in the acknowledgments, for reading through the proofs and making suggestions and things like that. So that's kind of fun. And his son Christopher is also a scholar in his own right. I guess he died a year or two ago, right?
Yep.
So he published some editions and translations himself. So both of them do come up. They're a serious part of the field.
You mentioned something. This is it's completely unfair for me to ambush you with questions collated from several years worth of videos. But you mentioned something in a video I watched recently that was probably a couple of years old. You said that there was a hypothesis out there somewhere that what we know as these sagas might not have been strictly an oral tradition that was written down. They might have been plays that were acted out, right?
Yeah.
That there were, these might have been, these characters that we hear about, people in the clan or whatever would have taken the role of these people. Can you talk about that? Like how popular an idea is that? Where do you stand on that?
Well, in that case, let me distinguish in technical terms, a saga is a prose work.
Right.
What we're talking about in this case is poems, narrative poems, or dialogue poems in the Poetic Edda.
Got it.
So if you read through an English translation of the Poetic Edda, typically a translator like me or Carolyn Larrington or someone, we're indicating who's talking by saying something like Thrym said, or Thor said, or Loki said. Sometimes the manuscript says that, but sometimes all you get is a little mark in the margin, L or Thorn or T or something.
Right. And
there's no connecting text. There's no someone said. It looks a lot like, actor's notes.
Yeah, it looks like then this person speaks and then this person speaks. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially there's a particular meter, the Otahotter, where a lot of the poems in that meter, other than Hávamál, are dialogues without a lot of narrative stuff interspersed in them. So you could easily imagine them being staged. And Terry Gunnell at the University of Iceland has argued for some time, and I think probably rightly, that these were performed.
Right.
And in my classrooms, I would try putting them on as performances, and they work pretty well. In fact, they get some things that are not really laugh lines when you just read them through are much funnier if you have people acting it out, obviously. No, that makes total sense. Yeah, it would give it a different context, right? Now, if you had people acting it out, those people are going to start making decisions about how to read lines and stuff like that in a very actorly way, even if they're not real actors or whatever. That's going to give these poems a completely different context, I think. Yeah. And if you read through an edition or translation of the Poetic Edda, you'll see a lot of places where there's prose, maybe even a paragraph or two of prose between stanzas. Well, that's not part of how that poem was transmitted. That's
Right.
the editor of the manuscript putting
Right.
in context.
Yeah.
But that context was probably originally just provided by, scene setting. So I think, yeah, it's quite likely that a lot of those poems, especially the ones that are dialogues,
Right.
which is a fair amount of them, were performed. And you can picture how, a family around the fire, maybe grandpa's Odin,
Yeah.
and dad
Yeah.
is Thor, and
Yeah.
I think people kind of naturally fall into these roles. So
Yeah. I mean,
I think it's very plausible.
that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, humans are performative animals, right? Like the theater tradition, these traditions go back a long way. How clear a picture do you feel like you have of what normal life was like for these people in that part of the world in the 900s or whatever? Like, do you feel like there's this vast ocean of information that we're denied because there's so little information and it's not growing? Or do you feel like, no, we know quite a lot. We basically have a pretty clear picture. Where do you fall on that?
Well, there's the known knowns, there's the known unknowns, and there's
Right.
the unknown unknowns, right? And there's different percentages of each. I mean, the archaeological record is not bad for Scandinavian Iceland in the Viking Age.
Right.
And I'm not an archaeologist, a point that I make to people all the time. But
Yeah.
From my understanding of the archaeological material, I have a sense of what things looked like, what the jobs around the farm were, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I like to think that I have a little tiny bit more appreciation for some of the stuff for not having always lived, the city life.
Right. Sure.
I know what it is to be legitimately afraid of the weather.
Right. Yeah.
I know what a god awful pain calving is, and making a fence is, and that stuff. I mean, not that I'm God's gift to cowboying or something, but like I've had like even just the little tastes of those things that I've had in my life. Like I have a sense of how hard life was that I think is an important thing to have. And of course, if you've lived close to animals, I think that also helps because, of course, these are people living very close to animals.
Right.
And, we live with, maybe a dog or a cat in the house, but people living with literally sometimes their cows in the house because that helps keep the house warm in the winter. I think I think there's a lot that makes sense in their stories when you reflect on.
I was watching a video from the he's a British curator of Assyriology at the British Museum, Dr. Irving Finkel, who is an expert on Assyriology and cuneiform. And one of his kind of like academic hobbies is collecting normal people's journals from like the 19th century. Because he's an Assyriologist. He has no idea. Back at that time, the only people who could write were scribes. And he's like, you don't know what kind of a treasure it is to have normal, everyday people just writing down what they were thinking and feeling on a daily basis. Do you feel like that there's like, because like, what was literacy like back then? We don't have a lot of their written stuff. Are there things that we're missing because we're not hearing the voices of just normal random people? We're hearing the voices of the storytellers or, the sages.
Oh, I'm sure that's true. I mean, you can actually just see that in the stories that are preserved. It's very likely, I think, that for your average person, Thor, for example, was a much bigger deal than Odin.
Yeah.
But Odin is the god with whom poets are concerned and warlords are concerned.
Right. Okay. I get it. Yeah.
And it's poets' voices and the poets are talking about the warlords. And so I think we actually got a fairly skewed perspective. I don't think an ordinary person would be much of an Odin person.
Right. And the poets were expected to be writing poems for their feudal lord, typically, right?
Well, not writing, composing.
Composing,
right?
Sure.
It's still orally transmitted.
Yeah.
Now, literacy in runes might have been pretty high.
Right.
There's a big find from Bergen, Norway from the 1950s or 60s when the pier burned down. They found a medieval trash heap underneath it as they started to dig it out to rebuild it. And in this trash heap were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of everyday just scrawled notes and stuff.
Wow.
Mom asked me to remind you not to come back without some eggs. right? Just plain, but very, very plain stuff like that.
Right.
Um, or, sometimes like naughty notes from some guy who likes some girl to the girl or to
Right.
some rival guy, like very everyday stuff,
Well, that's
which
like what the
implies,
Roman soldiers would write on in the graffiti that they would write, which is very
yeah,
relatable and normal and almost modern, right? Because
yeah,
the human psychology hasn't changed in 2,000 years. Yeah.
yeah. But of course, that's runes, and they never wrote anything very long in runes.
Right. Why
Runic
is that?
texts, as well, cultural inertia. By the
Really?
time that they have the notion of a manuscript, it's being brought by the church, which uses the Roman alphabet. And frankly, the Roman alphabet's a more efficient alphabet.
Right. Fair enough.
I mean, I can understand why someone wouldn't try to adapt the runic alphabet, although there are two manuscripts from Denmark that are written in runes. So someone did try it, but it didn't stick.
Huh.
Um, the longest text in runes, if I'm not mistaken, is the Ruk runestone, which is not very long. It would fill a page of printed text. They just weren't writing stuff down that way. Certainly not literature, right? It's a lot of cultures that favor oral literature are a little bit skeptical and resistant of writing it down.
Huh.
The
Why is
Vedas,
that?
which I don't exactly know. I mean, I could speculate that it's a sense that it's more protected, more secure in you if you're not writing it down for someone else, maybe.
Got it.
The Vedas in India date to what, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, but I think the oldest manuscripts are from the 1200s or something. People just didn't start writing them down till then. They were just passed on orally for thousands of years. So it's not necessarily the first thing people think about. And also, if you're a professional poet, professional storyteller, you might see writing your story down as basically like copyright infringement. Like,
Oh,
hey, you're coming for my job,
yeah.
right? That's my story to tell.
Yeah. If you want to know what I
So,
think, come talk to me. If I write it down, then you don't need me.
yeah. And that actually, I've wondered if that's part of why we lack similar stories from so many other parts of
That's
medieval
interesting.
Europe is by the time
Yeah.
anybody was willing to write it down,
Yeah.
that oral transmission had already been broken.
Well, if you live in a culture where being the storyteller is part of your role in the society, then you don't want to give that away. That's your job. If you write it down,
Yeah.
then anybody could read it, right? And so that's job security. That's interesting. I never thought of that.
Well, and I mean, also, like, you and I might be a tiny bit different for being people who are to whatever degree in the public eye.
Right.
But have you written down, your favorite stories from your life,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Or your favorite stories from your family? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know if it's actually even that normal now
No.
when it's easy to do.
Yeah.
By
That's
the way,
true.
this all a quick thought that kind of connects back to this. My grandfather told me uh, in the last days of his life that his biggest regret was that he didn't keep a diary.
Oh, wow.
So I was thinking
Wow.
about that when you mentioned the 19th century diaries and journals.
Yeah.
By the way, I still haven't started keeping a diary.
Well, yeah, that's funny. Yeah. 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 Does that mean you're going to have that same regret at that same point in your life?
Maybe. I mean, I think about it all the time, but you always kind of get to the end of the day and just like,
Sure. Well, I think the
I don't
only
have time for
way,
this.
the only context in which we do that is somebody who's a celebrity and they write a biography. They write their own autobiography.
or somebody ghostwrites their biography.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was growing up, I've read a lot of, like, especially actors and stuff, their biographies, and just getting the stories that you carry around with you. We don't normally write them down, and we have infinitely more access to technology that would let us do that.
Yeah.
So I obliquely referenced this to go toward the beginning of the video, but there was a huge new find in your field in like January. There's like it seems as though we've pushed back the earliest date that the runes were used by a substantive margin. So it was like it's now by 800 years or something, right?
Well, it wasn't pushed back that much, but it's pushed back considerably. So the oldest securely datable runic find previously was dated to right about AD 160.
Right.
And it is a comb from Vimos of Denmark. These finds from Ringerike in Norway, which actually consist of several inscriptions on a large stone, are potentially dated to as early as AD 25.
Jesus, that's crazy.
In fact, it could be older than that because that's the dating based on stuff in organic stuff in the grave.
Right. And
Right?
the
You can't
stones might have
date
been there longer.
rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it pushes it back, let's say at least a century. I think this is important because it helps. Well, it reminds us that there could be even older stuff out there.
Yeah.
But I think it also kind of gives a boost, and maybe other people will see it the completely opposite way. But I think it gives kind of a boost the notion that the runes aren't borrowed from the Roman alphabet,
Right.
because the earlier they are, the harder it is to explain why it's
Yeah.
transmission from Romans. And we forget how relatively late the Romans were getting into Northern Europe. I mean, the Gallic Wars are like 80 or like 50 BC.
Right.
You know, that's still not an impossible timeline, but I think it opens up more possibilities when the runes are pushed a little bit earlier. Part of what surprised me is that the letter shapes, the word forms, the kind of things being written down are very familiar.
Right.
So this tradition is already pretty established. So clearly we're not seeing the beginning of it.
No, yeah. So there's,
We're not
obviously it
s-
has to go back. You mentioned this in your video. You talk about how you need to add like a couple of 100 years to the earliest because it takes time for these things to develop. And that it seems, yeah.
I think you can responsibly add maybe a couple hundred.
Right.
Right. I get shaky beyond that.
Fair enough.
But I don't even think you have to add quite that much for it to fit most of the plausible timelines. The Roman alphabet didn't take over in Europe until the Roman Empire.
Right.
Right. And during the Roman Republic period, there were still a lot of weird, random derivatives of the Greek alphabet being used by all kinds of different people, Etruscans and Celts, and languages we can't even decipher.
Right.
So there was a lot of opportunities for them to interact with someone else. And currently, I do favor a Celtic explanation, which I explained in part 2 of my free course in runes.
Yep, I watched it. Yep, that was super
Very
interesting.
flattered. Steve, that was one of those videos that I thought, this is my magnum opus.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, it didn't quite.
So when there's a new discovery like this, what is your personal experience of it? Do you wake up in the morning and your phone's blowing up, or is it?
Yeah, basically.
Or is it really? Yeah. Is it like that? Is there a community of Norse specialists who all start messaging each other?
Yeah, everybody's texting and tweeting, and yeah, it was a big deal. Some people already knew about it. The finds were made, I think, maybe even a year or two ago.
Oh, really?
But all the people working on it were very tight-lipped. They really kept it closed until they went public with it. And supposedly there's something just as big coming in March.
Wow.
So I'm eagerly awaiting that. I actually have a guess based on a hint from someone that I know is at least tangentially connected to it, but I'm not going to go make a video about
of course,
my guess about a hint. So
yeah,
we'll see. But that's part of why I've been trying to put out more runic content, because I do try to strike when the iron is hot.
Yeah, sure.
I'm bad about that because I'm bad at knowing how to strike the iron. Making Thor videos around Thor movies doesn't typically help. Holiday videos always crash and burn, right?
Really?
You try to make the love videos around Valentine's or the Santa Claus videos around Christmas. That doesn't work. I don't know if that ever works for you, but it never works for me.
I mean, the closest analogy for me is that they are some videos that I write and upload that are based on some discussion happening online. Right. So I don't have videos that are related to my subject doesn't relate to any of that stuff. But I do see that notion of striking while the iron is hot. I've tried that in the past with I had a movie podcast and stuff. It never really moved the needle. But I have seen there'll be some discussion happening online about my field, about D&D. And I have an opinion, and I often disagree with what the people online are saying, or I'm watching some orthodoxy forming live. And I'm like, this is ahistorical. These people's point of view doesn't have anything to do. And also I'll make a video. And then for me, success is measured by, does that change the narrative? Does that actually move the needle? Yeah. So I think that's my equivalent of that. I have one question for you that I have to get out before, because this is something that's bugged me since before I knew anything about YouTube. And that has to do with transliteration. right? When you have, this is such a basic, dumb question. This is like day one student question. When you have like a vowel sound in another language that does not use the Roman alphabet like ours, and you're translating it, why not use the English letters that make those sounds? Because
give me an example.
Well, like for instance, there's an A that you often pronounce. There's like an A with a little circle over it, I think, and you often give it an O sound. And I'm like, well, then why not use an O?
Okay, hold on. I think I can actually. Do you have the transcription stuff turned on in Zoom where you can like draw on yourself?
No. This is the second time I have ever used Zoom. The first time being yesterday.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not exactly old hat at Zoom, but it's like this whiteboard thing you can turn on. Let me see.
Wait, yeah. Whiteboards. I see. There is a thing. I clicked on a button that said whiteboards.
But I think you might have to make me able to share screen or something. It doesn't.
Here, let me see if I can.
Yeah. Well, okay, but you're talking about the A with the circle over it.
Well, or
so that's still.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's still part of the Roman alphabet, right?
Sure, yeah, but that's not the letters. Are those the letters that they would have used to write that syllable down?
Well, the A with the circle over it is used in modern day Scandinavian languages, but you mean like old Norse letters like the thorn,
yeah,
the S, the D with the slash, and the AE that are So why not just replace those with equivalent English letters?
Well, I guess maybe this has to do with it's the difficulty in asking this question is I'm trying to express something that's happening in my head, which is I will hear somebody speaking a foreign language that is not English, and someone will transliterate it into English, and there's obviously some convention that these translators are using, but I don't know that tradition, and so I look at the letter and I'm like, that's not how you pronounce this letter, right? But they're using it in some kind of like analogous way that I don't understand.
Well, let me see if I can hit an answer to this by sort of explaining how this kind of works in Old Norse.
Right.
There's no universal agreement about how to transliterate Old Norse. So you find people, the biggest issue you get is with that letter the D with the slash.
Right, yeah,
which means the TH sound and then. Yeah. So some people will transliterate that as a D, some people as a TH.
Yeah.
I've experimented with a D with a slash just to show that it's one letter, but it's different from a D. There's just no universal agreement about how to represent that, which is kind of a shame because you wind up, unfortunately, what that contributes toward is a sense sometimes in the public that like it's all kind of chaos and we don't know what we're talking about, and like, oh, but this, I saw it spelled this way, so you're wrong. One thing I've tried to do lately, and actually even in more recent printings of my older books, is in the index, all of the names are also given, however exactly I've written them in the English translation, they're also shown with the original Old Norse spelling.
Right, yeah. So
you can at least see what I'm basing my, as you say, transliteration on. It's not exactly transliteration because it's the same alphabet. But,
right.
But just with different letters, a few different letters added. Yeah, it's a shame that there's not really an agreement about it. But then also sometimes those letters express sounds that aren't really in English. The O with a slash.
Yeah.
Is not a sound that we really have in English.
Sure. Yeah.
The O with a hook is not a sound that probably. It's not a sound I have. You might have it. You said you grew up in the Northeast, right?
Yeah, I grew up in New Hampshire. Yeah, but my whole family was from California. So even when I was a little kid, I spoke with a Californian accent in New Hampshire, and that was very strange.
Yeah, you do sound a little Californian.
How are you with accents? Like, are you can you do that Professor Henry Higgins thing? Is that where you can tell where someone's from based on their accent? That would surprise me, but because that wouldn't have occurred to me. But you are an expert in languages. You are a linguist.
Well, I'm not an expert in American dialects exactly, although I'm very interested in this stuff, right? I mean, like it's hard to be a linguist and not take an interest in what you hear around you.
Right, sure.
I did know a guy who could do that.
Wow.
A professor at the University of Michigan whose whole thing was American dialects. He could basically tell you what zip code you were from.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I remember he visited the University of Georgia when I was there for my master's, and like he kind of hated doing this because people always asked him to do it.
It's a party trick, yeah.
But,
yeah.
yeah, but everybody wanted him to do me because apparently like, some people think I have a horrible grating, very obvious accent, and some people say, "Oh, you don't have an accent at all." But like,
Right.
there's regionalisms there, and some
Yeah.
he nailed it,
Really?
which amazed me because I mean it's not actually all that obvious, right?
Right.
But he basically told me my story. Like, wow, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We moved around so much when I was a kid
Right.
that my brother, my sister, and I all talk a little bit differently.
Interesting. Because you're all different ages. So you were all having
Yeah,
formative experiences at different places in the country.
right.
That makes sense.
And I also, I think at just the right years, really fixed on my grandparents in a way they didn't, and so picked up stuff that my grandparents did that they didn't pick up.
Right.
So my sister, for example, who might be listening to this, hi Claire, if you are, you probably get tired of me picking on her, but she has some. She's a little bit more like a classic Texan accent.
Right.
She doesn't hear it at all,
Oh, I
right?
see.
And she says, "Well, I don't say, good night."
Right. Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, that's the most obvious thing people fix, right?
Yeah.
Cover over or try to adjust." But after they hit those obvious things, they leave alone all these less obvious things that if you know what to listen for, you can tell.
It's sort of it takes you aback when you realize that what you thought were meaningless differences are actually can pinpoint you exactly. There's a test, I think it's in the New York Times, that they published. It's an interactive like website where it asks you a series of questions. There's a lot of them. Like, can you hear the difference between do you pronounce these two words differently or the same? And there's like, I don't know, there's like 60 questions or something. And it nailed me. It's like it shows a heat map of the United States, and it's like New England, Southern California. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Yeah.
I've taken that, and it thought I was from Metairie, Louisiana.
But you are not.
I'm not. I thought that was interesting, though. I mean, it's not a ridiculous answer, right? Because there's some pretty old South around that part of Louisiana, and that's where a lot of my
I get it. Sure, yeah, because it has to do with like migration and where people who live where you live now came from, right? Yeah, I get it.
So I like it makes sense, but it's not right. But I like it's not Detroit, Michigan, right? Like,
sure, yeah.
Like, I can see where this comes from, and it's not like people even have much of an association with what the Mountain West sounds like. And the Mountain West is a huge mixing bag. When I was a kid 20 years ago, there were half as many people here.
Right.
This is a whole
that's interesting
smorgasbord out here right now. Yeah, you hear a lot of really Californian sounding people now.
Oh yeah, sure. There's been an exodus happening out of California because it's expensive to live here.
But you know what? By the way, speaking of the searchers,
yeah.
The guy who's kind of a comic relief. He's wooing the girl, and he has the kind of over the top Southern sounding accent.
Oh yeah,
that's old time Colorado.
Really?
He's from Alamosa, Colorado.
That's interesting. I would have guessed that was an accent the actor was putting on. That's interesting.
No,
that's actually the way he talks.
He's exaggerating a little bit.
Right.
He's using it. That is an old timey, like rural Colorado accent. But no one associates that with Colorado anymore. So.
This is a completely unrelated question, but actually related to the question about Tolkien and whether or not you would come across that name. One of the things that got me really interested in language, which has been a kind of a very, very, very minor interest of mine for decades, was a documentary I watched on PBS in the 80s called The Human Language. I think it was like 3 episodes. And it was basically about it, and it featured Noam Chomsky as a linguist. He is now primarily, I think, known as like a polemicist, right? Somebody that talks about politics and realpolitik and stuff like that. But I knew him first as a linguist. Is that, and my amateur understanding of him is that this is a guy that had a major, major impact in the field. Is Chomsky's name one that you would come across in your studies normally, just being a linguist?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean,
really?
In graduate school in linguistics, you have to do some generative syntax, which is his
that's his
monument.
Yep.
I mean, what generative syntax is in particular has changed quite a bit
Yeah.
during his very long career. I think he rejects some later versions of it in addition to some earlier versions of it. And, I have a friend who went up to Harvard and MIT and knows
MIT.
Chomsky. And so
Yeah. Wow.
I guess I'm like 1 degree of separation.
Wow, that's cool.
Chomsky.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. That's neat.
Well, I'm closer to that to some other names who it's a very different, weird context. But I think the closest I had to a conversation with Noam Chomsky was I asked my friend Kaylee, would you ask him to confirm whether he ever really called Icelandic the Ebola of linguistics?
Oh, shit.
And turns out he did. In fact,
what?
Say that, so.
In what context?
Well, Icelandic is hard to explain in some syntactic ways. There's some weird stuff with Icelandic.
Really?
That's very aberrant. Yeah, like to put it as concisely as I can, there's places where you say me where you'd expect I.
Okay.
That are just kind of like
why? Like what? Weird. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no sense to it. It's just that certain verbs sort of randomly flip cases, basically.
Right.
Which is, it's a little bit like, I guess, analogous to something like in Spanish, me gusta.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like yo gusto.
Right. Yeah. It's idiosyncratic. You just have to know it. Yeah.
Yeah. But Icelandic is just loaded with those weird idiosyncratic verbs, and it's very hard to explain by, a framework that explains how language comes together in the brain. So yeah, apparently he did call it the Ebola of linguistics.
Tolkien described himself as a philologist, and Chomsky as a linguist. Is there a difference between those two things, or is it just the same thing, and we just use different terms over the centuries?
Depends on who you ask. Philology. So Chomsky doesn't do philology, but you could argue that Tolkien does linguistics. So philology is a side of linguistics, kind of. Typically, what people mean by philology, actually, if you get down to it, my degree is in Scandinavian studies, specifically philology.
Right. I think I heard you mention that once.
Yeah. Parentheses philology. It's kind of an old-timey word for historical linguistics, but especially historical linguistics that's very concerned with
like reconstructing
literature and texts, and and also digging into texts.
I get it.
So there's usually like some paleography and things like that.
Paleography. Yeah. One of the people I follow online is, I don't know if you know this person. This is one of those, oh, you're from America, do you know? But one of the people I follow on Twitter is Lisa Fagan Davis, who is, she's a paleographer, and she is the person that gets, this is not her normal job, but kind of that she gets called upon anytime somebody proclaims that they have deciphered the Voynich manuscript. The press go to her, and she has to go, okay, here's why this is nonsense. Is the Voynich manuscript something that you've come across in your studies?
I've seen it. I mean,
right. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, like I have no idea what it says.
Yeah. Well, of course not. Yeah. No. Yeah. I'm trying to get a sense of what it's like, literally, like being a linguist, how these names and these cultural phenomena that I'm familiar with, people like Tolkien and Chomsky, things like the Voynich manuscript, whether or not they have any weight or awareness if you were just a regular jobbing linguist. So that's the reason I'm asking these questions.
I would say in linguistics today, when you hear philology, you kind of smell the pipe smoke.
Yeah. I get it. Sure.
And look for the elbow patches.
Yeah.
It sounds a little old fashioned. It is kind of associated with that Tolkien generation.
I think every industry or every kind of tradition has that linguistic structure where there are some words you use where you're just trying to give the subject a little kind of the weight of ages and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it still does mean something. I mean, even though people don't know what the word means often, I don't think it's objectionable for me to say I'm a philologist.
Right. Yeah.
It's just not something but then I have to explain what that means.
Yep.
Because in the mid 20th century, all of that stuff fell really, really out of favor. Partially because, and this is something I'm kind of familiar with from some current struggles with my subject, some prominent Nazis were real into philology.
Yep.
The term Aryan is, it's a long story, but it comes from philology.
Yep.
So, the field really kind of turned against that stuff. A lot of linguists today, not just Chomsky, but I've heard other people I could name in the public eye who, really dismiss that stuff as just kind of like play. Like, who
Right.
cares? You've got this ancient stuff. We're trying to figure out how kids learn to speak and,
Sure.
why language is structured the way it is. And it's kind of more theoretical. So for some people, I think today linguistics has preferentially that sense of that more theoretical, like verging on comp sci
Right.
stuff,
Yeah. I get it.
which I brushed shoulders with in grad school, but it wasn't what my big focus was.
You mentioned earlier, you gave a caveat, which you do occasionally in your videos, where you say, I'm not an archaeologist. And I was reading a book, this came out a couple of years ago, called The Horse, the Wheel, and Language.
Yeah. David Anthony.
Yeah. It was fascinating. And I've heard you talk about some of these things in your videos. Is there a tension? I got the impression from that dude's book that there is a tension between these two disciplines, the people in them, and they each sort of view the other as being, not the people you should go to for answers, right? Those people dig around in the ground. Yeah, but those people just read dead stuff, right? Is that real, or is that something that I was imagining?
No, it's real, and it's so stupid. Part of it is that we tend to be in different departments.
Right. Sure.
Right.
So you don't
So,
mix. You don't. Yeah.
yeah, and funding for them isn't funding for us, and vice versa.
Right.
And part of it, I think this prejudice is getting worn down a little bit in my generation and later. But it's interesting to note that I don't know archaeologists who are older than I am.
Oh, really? Really?
Or not much older than I am. Yeah, the archaeologists that I've met are my generation, right?
Interesting.
And they're not people I met in school. And in school, I got no schooling in archaeology. I'm very interested in it.
You're right. Yeah.
And especially in the last few years, I've tried to redress some of these gaps in my understanding.
Right.
I read up about it a little bit, but I still don't feel like it's something I could teach exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's very separate. And I mean, obviously, archaeology is there's a lot of physical science components.
Yep.
The field work stuff. It's very specialized skills. So someone like me working mostly with text, of course, it's a different specialization. But we should talk more. And I'm trying. One of the big goals of my channel, to kind of get back to the big meta YouTube stuff, is actually to be a conduit for other people to present their expertise on.
Oh, okay.
One thing I like to do is go to people in my field or adjacent fields and say, I have an audience that would love to hear from you. You have stuff they would love to hear about, and you'd probably enjoy, talking to the public about it. Why don't you come on the channel? And I'll shut up mostly and let you talk and let my Patreon supporters ask questions. And I like to think that that's something that appeals to those people. Certainly a lot of people have enjoyed it, it seems like. But doing that and getting those interviews arranged has helped me broaden my own horizons.
Right.
It's given me a sense of, I haven't read up about that.
Have you sought out archaeologists to bring on the channel?
Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah, the main one that I've had on a couple times now is a great guy in Iceland, Hávamál Guðmundsson.
That's cool.
Yeah, he's a really neat guy. But he is my main archaeologist contact.
Right. He's your archaeology guy. When you've got questions or you want to talk about it, you go to that guy. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like my emails to archaeologists, anything out of the blue would probably go unanswered. But
it's cool you've got somebody like, I noticed you've done a lot, and it seems like you've ramped this up, I would say over certainly since 2020, the number of interviews you've done with other people in this field. Is that something that you plan to do? Is that something that you hit upon? Like what was your process there? What was the first time you reached out to somebody and said, hey, do you want to come on the channel?
Yeah. What was the first one? Oh, I don't know who the first person to come was. It might've been Ármann Jakobsson, who is a really prolific Icelandic scholar of the Eddas and everything. Part of it was exactly what I was saying about how the channel isn't about me.
Yeah.
It's, my idiosyncrasies are there basically to show you that, I am who I am.
Yeah.
And this is, but, you know, at the end of the day, if I can make it, like I said, a conduit for other people, then I'm very happy to do that. And I feel better if someone has a big find or a big publication or something like that.
Sure.
I feel better having that person come and talk about it.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
Now, occasionally I've reached out to people, like this happened about a year ago. A colleague of mine, Yeki Nordstrom, published a really interesting paper reinterpreting a major runic inscription. And I said, well, I'd love to have you on the channel to talk about it. And, you know, for one reason or another, that just wouldn't work out. But she kind of told me, you know, what she would have communicated to the public. So I wound up kind of.
Got it. Yeah.
Like,
you got the download.
Doing, like kind of doing a report, but with the blessing of, so
yeah.
I like to do that kind of thing where it's not just, I'm not trying to be a stage hog.
Sure. Yeah. You're using your channel as a platform, right? Like,
yeah, I built the stage, and now, you know, I'm happy to have other people use it. But of course, with the strict caveat that, you know, it's never going to be people preaching.
Right.
Yeah. It's not ideologues coming on.
Right. Yeah.
Because most people who talk about this stuff, but like I'm trying to bring in the scholars who, you know, have a find or a discovery or an idea.
There's
and in fact, I've tried to bring on people who really, really strongly disagree with me, and it hasn't happened yet. But I'd actually kind of like that. Like I would like to have someone come on with it. You know, like be civil about it, but like let's disagree about something on here. There was a guy.
Let's find somebody who's convinced that blor means black, and they don't have a word for blue. Let's fight about it.
Like that'd be interesting. Actually, the one I was really working on, I met a guy. I guess I won't name him because maybe this would be embarrassing for him or something. But he was extremely skeptical of the whole project of YouTube.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and you know, I said, well, honestly, this may sound ridiculous, but I would love to have you come on YouTube.
Yeah,
and tell me why this doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. Like actually
absolutely.
come and tell me that my project is illegitimate. Like if we were civil about it, like come and tell me why this doesn't work and tell me what's going to work better.
Because he obviously, like somebody who has an opinion like that, they obviously have a well-developed argument that they have in their head. Right. And you want to get that on the page or on the screen, so to speak. Yeah.
But it didn't happen. I think he might have thought I was making fun of it, but I was sincere.
Oh yeah, sure, right? Of course, yeah. Well, I mean, somebody who thinks that this whole YouTube project is a waste of time, they're going to be skeptical of coming on and talking about it. I bet, yeah.
Yeah, but
that's too bad. That's too bad because I think that would be a fascinating. That would be especially for somebody like me who takes YouTube for granted. I think that would be a fascinating video to get the point of view of somebody who's like, no, you're wasting your time.
It reminded me. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
No, go ahead. You're why we're here.
And it's probably just you and me now anyway.
No. This is actually quite a good stream. We've got, it looks like we've got almost 800 people here, which is really good.
Holy crap.
Yep, it's really good for us. Wow. The reason I'm on YouTube, the reason I do this stuff on Twitch, by the way, is because nobody knows I'm here. Like Twitch, like my audience is a YouTube audience, and they by and large do not care about or know what is happening on Twitch, and that gives me the freedom to talk about stuff and be kind of off the cuff and improvisational that I would not necessarily want to be permanently forever on YouTube.
Well, while we're here, I mean, I'll mention that's Vimeo for me, right?
Oh, is it interesting? That gets okay.
I back up most of my videos there. Like sometimes I forget to make them public, and sometimes I just make them public months before they're on YouTube because like no one's here,
no one's on, no one's watching there. Yeah. So this is dovetailing into exactly what I wanted to talk about next, because like there is definitely YouTube has communities inside it of video makers. Like there is definitely a D&D tube, right? And many of these creators know each other.
You and John Wick.
Wait, say that again.
You and the original, the real John Wick.
Yes. Wait. How do you know even who that dude is?
I noticed him in the acknowledgments of one of your books.
Yeah.
I thought, is this a joke? And then I looked up John Wick. I'm like, oh, it's a D&D guy.
That's hysterical. Of course, I wrote that acknowledgement in 2011. Of course, somebody who reads that now is going to be like, John Wick.
Yeah.
I never would have thought of that. That's fast. That's hysterical. Yes. John
By the
Wick.
way,
good friend of mine.
Speaking of joke acknowledgments, nobody reads acknowledgments. I do, as you can now see.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
I do have a joke acknowledgement, and I think at least 2 books. It would be very hard to spot, but there is one. So.
And what is now? We have to know what it is now.
No,
okay, we have homework. I see.
You could work it out.
Fair enough.
But Yeah, it wouldn't be fun if I just told you that. It'd be kind of dumb.
No, I get that. Sure. Now I like having a puzzle to solve. So yeah, I have a pretty like, there is a thing that is like D&D tube, right? And I sort of consider myself as kind of doing my own thing, right? But I'm a fan. I'm on YouTube all the time. So there's like music YouTube, right? There's Adam Neely and there's Rick Beato, and there's and there's and you can see that at a certain level they all kind of know each other and they're in each other's videos. You're in Simon Roper's videos often, for instance. Yeah. Is there a linguistics YouTube creator community? And if so, what is it like and what is your role in it?
Yeah, we have kind of patched together, I would say a dead languages YouTube.
Okay. Dead language as distinct from linguistics YouTube.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like dead languages guys. It's kind of what
that's interesting.
Club sort of is.
Yeah, sure. That's fascinating.
I mean, I guess, and this is one of those things that'll be, sand in the craw of some people. I'm also a little bit peripherally connected to gun YouTube, which is another community. Yeah. Right, because I'm a competitive shooter, and Ian McCollum has been a great friend, created some great opportunities for me himself.
That's cool.
But dead language YouTube, I think was something that I really needed and didn't know that I needed.
Community. You needed a community.
Yeah, and what's funny, and I hope that I'm not misrepresenting these guys, as they might see this.
They're definitely going to see it.
But well,
I'm going to send it to them.
But Luke Ranieri and Simon Roper, I'll mention as my two major examples here. Both of them, I think, started getting bigger on YouTube a little after I did.
Right.
And both, and I really hope that I'm not misrepresenting them because this sounds arrogant otherwise, kind of claimed to take some inspiration from what I did.
Right. They might have seen you doing it and thought, if he can do it, yeah.
Yeah, if he can do it for Old Norse, I can do it for Old English or Latin and Greek. Well, so I think they didn't really want to approach me because there was kind of like that sense of just, I had some seniority or something.
Sure.
But then I didn't want to approach them because I looked at their videos and thought, God, these guys are doing a better job than I am.
Huh.
Like, it is so embarrassing.
Wait, now that's interesting. Why would you say, what is it about their videos that makes you think it's better? Is it that, because like, I sort of feel like with Simon Roper and some of the other YouTubers, some of the other dead language YouTubers I follow, I sometimes think that they got it lucky because they're studying languages that have a broader corpus or are more recent or are culturally more, what is it that makes you think, oh man, they're doing it way better than me? Is it their subject? Is it their presentation? Is it the technology they're using?
And/or with all those things. I mean, the best example I could give you is with Luke Ranieri, because I've met him in person, right? I know him the best of this group. And I've met Andrew McHenry too. But Luke Ranieri, he spent a week here with me. It was really cool. Let me start out by saying that guy is exactly who you think he is from his videos. He is the smartest, friendliest, just coolest guy, right?
That's
He's
awesome.
Exactly how he seems in his videos. Really, really awesome guy. Hidden depths all over visible depths and hidden depths. Awesome guy. He brings that joie de vivre to everything that he does. Like he sounds like he's having, I think he really is, just having a ball telling you about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He loves it. And and he would love for you to love it too.
Yeah. That's what, by the way, I only know this because this is a very strange thing to say. I only know this because people tell me this. I think, I'm a great writer and I know a lot about D&D and that's why people, no. People watch because I'm enthusiastic and they literally say, I love your enthusiasm. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay. I did not know that about me. But yeah, that's one of the things that works on YouTube is people, I talk about this all the time because I've been in video games and tabletop games and I'm a consumer of a lot of these things. And I'm like, people just want to fall in love, man. People just want to fall in love and you just got to give them an excuse to do it. And when it doesn't matter what their specialist subject is, if you can tell they love it and they're genuinely enthusiastic about it, you will get enthusiastic.
Right. Well, but this is an advantage that you and he have over me because, you've seen those old timey cartoons where, the tarantulas fill the skeleton and they make the skeleton kind of dance around clunkily. Like that's my personality, right? That's
No, I
my
know.
my
I completely
charisma.
disagree. I completely disagree.
That's,
I've watched hundreds of your videos for years, and it is self-evident to anybody who's paying attention that you are genuinely enthusiastic about this. And not only about the subject, but you're enthusiastic about the teaching of it.
I don't even know how that comes across,
Oh,
because you meet Ranieri and it's just like, man, this is enthusiastic.
yeah, sure. I get that.
Like,
Yeah.
well, and he just has this raw charisma. I like it's that guy can work a crowd.
Right.
I mean, man.
I
Um,
see. I get it. So I think the subtext here is that it sounds like you're saying that those folks, people like that, they have a natural aptitude for being in front of the camera that you feel like you don't have.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, it's not like I get camera fright or anything, right?
Right. Okay. Obviously not. Yeah.
Or stage fright.
Right.
I never got stage fright, right? That was never a problem teaching, and I would teach huge classes. It's not that. It's more like it's what I do. It's
Right.
just,
It's just a job. Yeah.
yeah. Like I don't necessarily feel like I'm electrifying people.
I remember when I was taking speech and debate in college, or maybe in high school, and one of the things they tell you, and I had no reason to doubt this, but now it seems, especially talking to you, it seems kind of strange that public speaking was one of people's greatest fears,
Oh yeah, never was for me.
and not you.
And it's funny, like I am fairly introverted, right? I'm not a crowd guy.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm the same. I'm surprisingly the same way. In fact, I think I mentioned this in a direct messages with you, where I'm like, well, normally I spend my time trying to avoid talking to anybody.
That's right, because I invited you to the family game night.
That's right, and I was trying to find a way to
Put
explain.
you on the spot.
Yeah.
Putting you on the spot in front of a crowd now.
Well, okay. Well, now I'm going to have to say yes, obviously.
But it's different for me being in a crowd versus talking to the crowd.
Ah, I see. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And also, I feel like some part of me always kind of wanted to be in a role like professor,
Right.
pretty early on.
Right.
And I paid a lot of attention to how my high school and college teachers taught.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's a commonality, by the way, between my friends who became teachers. Everyone, I have several friends that became teachers, and they all had a very similar experience where it was about that teacher, not always one, but this teacher, they wanted to be that person. They wanted that job. This is a thing that happens.
But I think also that helped me not develop stage fright, because I literally watched a teacher teach with his fly down an entire period once, and nobody noticed.
Yeah.
Right. And things like that made me realize, oh, like people do. It's weird when you get on a stage or you get on a video screen or something.
Right.
I mean, there's always trolls, but for the most part, people are kind of giving you a certain benefit of the doubt.
Right. Sure.
Right. They're putting you in a slightly different role. They're not looking. Okay. Again, there's always trolls who are going to look for anything, but they're not looking for whatever your.
They're there to hear you talk. They're there to hear you talk. It's a different context. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're not being a jerk to them,
sure,
right? Because you can waste people's time, but if you're not being just a jerk, people are happy to listen to you if they're interested in what you're going to say. So, I've always kind of approached it that way. I'm not going to waste your time,
right?
Or I'm certainly not going to try to. One of the things I think I became semi-famous for with my students in universities, class would sometimes end for me like 5 minutes early. 10 minutes early sometimes. And I would just say, I have presented this in exactly the level of detail that I wanted to.
Yeah.
You don't have any more questions. And I don't want to just do 10 minutes of tomorrow's lecture.
Sure.
So here it is. You've learned the material. I'm not just going to tell you stories for 10 minutes.
Right.
Right. You can go. It's fine.
Yeah.
And I think actually that
it's not about running out the clock, right? It's about, I had something to say. I said it.
God.
Well, it's funny because that's very like YouTube. That's very like a YouTube video, right? And the reason you're bringing it up is because that must be unusual. The idea that you got noted. You got noted by saying, I'm not going to fill up the 55 minutes or whatever. I'm going to talk until I'm done. Yeah. And if that means you leave early, but that's a YouTube video. Is you say what you need to say, and then it's over.
Right. I mean, if they were really lucky or unlucky, maybe I would have some story that I would spin off from something. I do have some ridiculous stories.
I do have one or two more questions I want to ask before we wrap this up. So since you got started, what has surprised you the most about being, because you were not already a YouTube native as a consumer. You came to this somewhat as a process. What
Yeah.
surprised you the most about your time on YouTube?
Honestly, and this kind of goes back to something we were saying earlier. I'm surprised I'm still here.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought basically I did not have high hopes for this as a side gig, which is
Right.
exactly what it started as.
Right.
Like I thought I'm going to kind of enjoy this and maybe make a little bit of extra money
Yeah.
off of this, but like this is like I'm kind of a natural pessimist. I didn't foresee that it was going to become a career. And I'm pretty close to being a full-time YouTuber for longer than I ever taught at any given
Oh,
university.
really? That's interesting. Wow.
So the very fact that it's turned into a career, at least in the early part of the 2020s for me, like you can tell how hesitant I am to like even project beyond
Yeah.
that. That's really, really surprising to me. I never expected it.
What would you say, because you've been doing this for a while now, what have you learned about making videos?
Well, I think people appreciate a certain mixture of predictable and unpredictable.
Sure. Yeah.
I think people.
Would you, do you mean within a single video, or do you mean over a bunch of videos?
Kind of over the span of the year, maybe.
Right.
I hit. It's weird how I came to this Wednesday, Friday update schedule, but that's what I've held to for a few years, and I think people like that they know when to expect it.
Right. Sure.
I think, I've noticed if I get into kind of a rut where I'm just talking about one thing for a long time, like when my book, The Wanderer's Hávamál, came out into 2019, I just made like nothing but Hávamál videos for a couple months.
Sure.
I think people got fatigue of the subject.
Got it.
So I try to mix things up. And right now I'm really trying to hit runes, but like I try to kind of pepper things in.
Yep. Yeah, I do the same thing. I have ideas for series, but it really just never, and for me, it's more just what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in making 6 or 7 videos in a row about one subject. I want to make all those videos, but I'm going to spread it out.
Right. And I try to mix up, do something like half and half videos for people who are just searching for the answer to a question that anybody might have, and videos for, the more hardcore, really interested people, the people I think of as, paying the Patreon bills.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's, just trying to kind of mix things. Being willing to experiment, I think, is a huge deal.
What kind of experiments have you done?
Equipment, apps, content, preview photos, tripods.
Right. Okay. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I've kind of, I'm willing to just, I guess I never feel like I'm doing a great job. So I'm always willing to kind of try.
You don't feel like, so let me ask you a question. When you say, I don't feel like I'm doing a great job, do you feel like this is something that you have not mastered, and well, is that a process? Totally. Do you feel like that's a process you're going through? Do you see yourself someday as having figured this out?
Oh, I think I'll always kind of be a white belt, right? But
okay.
It's, I look at my videos from late 2016, and you can tell there's a lot of things that are different, right? The video is focused now, and
there's not a whiteboard. There's not a whiteboard behind you anymore and stuff like that. Yeah,
there's stuff going on.
Hey, Rick Beato got started with a whiteboard behind him. That dude's the king of music YouTube now. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are more ignominious beginnings.
Absolutely. I
mean, it's not the worst, and some of those videos are actually still, I think, pretty okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I haven't remade all of them, but you can tell a difference between a video I made then and a video I make now. And I like to think that if I'm still doing this in 2028, that it'll be the same way.
Yeah, that there'll be a progression, because it's having something to learn is fascinating, right? So it gives you, there's always, especially with YouTube, because the technology is changing and the audience is changing. There's always something to learn.
Yeah. Well, and at the same time, I'm willing to in 2028 say, "Gosh, I was an idiot in 2023." Right?
Right.
Maybe there's something I'm getting totally wrong right now.
Right.
I will be willing to acknowledge that if that proves to be true, whether in the meta details of making YouTube videos or in the details of stuff that I talk about.
Well, that's the nice thing about
I'm
YouTube is every video you make is someone's first Dr. Crawford video, right? So you can.
That's a weird thought.
It's true though, right? There's always people are always that YouTube is going to serve your videos up to various people, occasionally randomly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's people I pity. Certain videos are their first video.
Because you look back and you're like, that was not a great, that should not be your first video, right? But that's part of the process is that you see how you see how new people respond to the new videos, and that changes how you see what you're making.
Right.
Dr. Crawford.
And I also think,
go ahead.
I also think about, how do I stumble on someone else's video? And, I try to watch other channels and think about what they're doing and what I can adapt. Not knock off, but like
what other
so
just out of curiosity, and it's okay if the answer is none, that's not what I do. What outside of Dead Language YouTube, are there other YouTubers that you follow, like just casually?
Oh yeah, I was a religious follower of this channel called Bella Hummingbird, where this lady had a live cam of the nest of Allen's hummingbird. She nested 5 times a year, so pretty much any day of the year you could always tune in.
That's cool.
To see, her sitting on her eggs, or the eggs are hatching, or the fledglings are flying.
You mentioned in a video that you're a cat, you're a bird person in a cat person world.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I like mountain lions, but yeah, if you love birds, it's kind of, if you're a huge wild bird person, it's kind of hard to be a cat person, probably.
Sure, yeah. We've learned that cats sort of like they commit genocide.
Yeah.
They wipe out entire species of birds.
Yeah, definitely. So I also watch Leslie the Bird Nerd. She's wonderful. She's in Newfoundland. She's made friends with all of her neighborhood birds, and just makes really, really relaxing videos. Another one outside of my circle, I watch Animal Wonders Montana.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is, it is an animal rescue in Montana, and similar thing, just relaxing videos about these animals they rescue, and they all have these charming stories. And, it's another channel I watch. Otherwise, I keep tabs on my YouTube neighbors.
Sure.
Right, the other YouTubers I know, you and the Dead Language community, and Ian McCollum. Occasionally I'll venture off to something recommended one way or another, but I don't spend a lot of time consuming media. Yeah,
I get that.
And I spend a lot of my time without an internet connection, although that can be deceptive because all my videos, everything's scheduled and stuff, right? So
sure, yeah.
Can look like.
But I think that wouldn't surprise somebody who was familiar with your videos, because look where you shoot them. Like, there's not where would the internet come from out in some of these gorgeous environments that you shoot in.
Oh, there's places where if there were a signal, I would go chop down the tower.
Fair enough. Yeah.
There's places where that should not be.
That should not be. Yeah. Leave the land the way it is. I get that. Dr. Crawford, thank you very much for joining us. I thought this was fantastic.
It's been a pleasure. It's nice to, have a back and forth with you, and and as long as we've been talking, we've never done this.
No, I know. We've known each other, from distance for, I don't know how many years it's been. It's got to be at least 5, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to get together, if I find myself out that way, or you find yourself out this way, it'd be cool to.
Absolutely. Anytime you have well, you used to teach. That's one of the things that we didn't talk about. You used to teach at UCLA, and I used to work for many years just right down the street. I might have been. We might have passed each other in like Westwood or something like that.
What years were you there?
2003 to 2008, I guess. Is that it? 5 years? No, it had to be longer than that. 2010 probably.
Okay, I was 2011 to 14.
Oh, okay, so we were just like, yeah.
So just a little bit missed each other. Yeah.
Well, if you ever have any reason to be in Southern California, please let me know, and we'll have you. I'd love to give you a tour of the office and show you our digs and stuff. It'll be a lot of fun. You come by our game night.
Sounds a lot of fun.
And you play Codenames.
Maybe I can play test your new Palladium-based RPG.
Yep, you're here first. We are forking rifts in our new. That's where all our ideas come from. Is because steal from the best, right? Yeah. So I guess that's an important point. We've managed largely to skip that. I think you referenced it once earlier in this video that you actually played role-playing games when you were a young person, but it was almost exclusively Rifts.
Well, not just Rifts, but other Palladium
Oh,
games.
Rifts and other, other Palladium
Yeah,
games. Yep.
that was pretty much all. AD&D and AD&D Second Ed were around, and then the last iteration of D&D that I had any contact with was 3.5. So it's been a little while.
Yep. I mean, I came up at a time where Dungeons and Dragons was very obscure. So like, I still have that kind of like, really? When I hear anybody, like normal people even know that this game exists, it still kind of blows me away.
Well, I wonder if anyone, I'm not looking at the Twitch, but I wonder if anyone knows what my actual favorite game was, which was Beyond the Supernatural, which was one of Palladium's RPGs. It was one book and like one 16-page supplement, but it was this fantastically crafted. The setting was fantastic, just really crafted, like modern supernatural horror.
Yeah, there are people in chat.
Before
Nero
that
Spittle
stuff.
64 AD, Reagan are like, I have that book. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Yep.
Yeah, it. I don't think it was ever a big hit for them, but it was like the X Files before the X Files.
Oh, really? Okay, sure, I get that.
It was really, I thought, a great setting, and not as munchkiny as Riffs could be.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's not. That's not hard.
No,
Yeah.
no. My hatchling dragon gets into its mech.
Oh, I really, really hope that people watching this video when it goes up on YouTube appreciate how deep a cut that is.
Is
Because
that deep? I don't know.
it's super deep. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I kind of am curious to see what happens, because it'll probably be a couple of weeks because we got other stuff in the pike. But eventually this is going to go up on YouTube, and I'll be really curious to see how many people are surprised to discover that Dr. Crawford even knows what RPGs are. I mean, I know that you were a consultant on one of the Assassin's Creed games,
Yeah,
and I don't think,
yeah.
is that something that is still a part of? Like, how often do you get asked by TV shows, Netflix, video game companies to come check out their Viking, their Old Norse attempts?
It happens time to time. It's not a super often thing, but time to time. Oh, what I wanted to point out before I forget.
Yeah.
Another thing, you're into albums, right? So I brought out a favorite here.
Is that
I thought that
okay?
It's a concept album for you.
Oh my goodness, is that a Johnny Cash album?
Yeah,
Wow.
1960. It's a true concept album. He's getting on a train and he's rolling around the USA. So that's a little piece from.
I have not heard that.
Collection.
I mean, I've obviously Ringle Rat. What is that?
It's another concept album for you.
That's crazy. I mean, Live at Folsom Prison is a landmark album that I've spent a lot of time with. So Johnny Cash is definitely in my wheelhouse. I have not seen that album before.
Oh well, that's something you've got to get your hands on.
I'm gonna check it. I'm 100% gonna check it out.
It's kind of weird. It's got a lot of spoken word stuff and a lot of train sound effects.
Right. Well, because like you said, it's a concept album. It's telling a story, right? Yeah. So that's cool. So give me. Actually, I'm a little bit curious. Around what year did that come out? That's got to be like 60s.
1960. Yeah, 1960.
Straight up 1960. Oh wow.
60. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
It starts with him reciting an impressive litany of American Indian tribes.
Really?
Yeah, because he's setting the stage for the trip by rail he's taking around the USA, and he says, it's the land that I can't remember exactly how this goes, but he says it's the land that the coal miners and the lumberjacks and the et cetera live on, and it's been lived on from long before and he just lists so many tribes.
That's interesting.
It's really interesting. Yeah, it's different. I mean, he was at the height of his fame, but it's definitely not Walk the Line or something.
No, I get that. Is Johnny Cash one of yours? Do you have like a lot of Johnny Cash albums, for instance?
Yeah, he's a big favorite. Merle Haggard is another big favorite, and then I like some
classic
living outlaw country. Turnpike Troubadours are a big favorite.
Oh, okay.
My theme music is by Icy Hawks in L.A., which is a Los Angeles-based country.
Wow, I did not. It never even occurred to me to ask where your do. I've heard that hundreds of times. It never occurred to me to ask where it came from. And
that was given to me by Icy Hawks in L.A. They used to come up on my Pandora all the time, and then I found myself teaching at UCLA, and I thought I guess Icy Hawks in LA is probably in LA. So I just watched for a show and we wound up meeting. And actually, the singer teaches at USC.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, we're friends. And anyway, I remember I was looking a few years ago for theme music for the channel, and I was looking at all those things you can download or buy or
Yeah,
whatever. And I thought,
copyright free.
yeah, and I thought, well, anybody can use any of that. And I just happened to ask them, what would it cost if I commissioned you to do
Yeah.
a little jangle? And they said, actually, we just kind of have this one laying around. So they just gave it to me.
That's amazing.
So it's pretty sweet. Yeah.
It's awesome. Like what, the opportunities to collaborate and be creative YouTube provides, or just the internet in general. Because that story is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, they're really cool guys. You'd enjoy meeting them.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean they're in LA. That might happen.
You're in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean sort of. Yeah. Dr. Crawford, thank you for joining us. This was fantastic. I will let you go, and I'll let you know when this goes up on YouTube. I'm on behalf of my audience. There's about 700-800 people here. This was
my thanks to them, and all the best to them, and all the best to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and I hope we get to do this again.
Oh, I hope so too. Well, until next time.
Until next time, sir. Thank you very much. All the best.